Hi, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar on StateRAMP best practices. We're going to be joined today by some great panelists as we talk about the Center for Digital Government's most recent update to best practices for procuring cloud solutions. We're also going to talk a little bit about best practices for StateRAMP, especially working with our government members and participating governments. So thank you and welcome. My name is Leah McGrath, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as the Executive Director for StateRAMP. Before we jump into the panel discussion, I am going to talk about a few updates that are relevant to the discussion. First, StateRAMP. If you're new to StateRAMP, StateRAMP is a nonprofit membership organization, and we are made up of leaders from the public and private sector. We're mission focused on improving cybersecurity by promoting best practices and standardization for our government suppliers and the products that they leverage to help serve government. RAMP stands for something. That is the Risk Authorized Management Program. So StateRAMP was founded to really be a shared service for our state and local government members, so that rather than having every state or government entity create their own risk authorized management program, they can leverage the shared service that is StateRAMP. And by doing so, be able to really advance their cyber risk management program, and providers then are able to benefit by verifying and reporting into one centralized program management office in order to serve the many government customers that they have. StateRAMP, in terms of best practices, we want to start with recognizing the Center for Digital Government's most recent publication of the Best Practice Guide for as-a-Service and Cloud Procurements. So the CDG first published this guide in 2014. It was updated in 2016. And then again, most recently in March of 2023, was released with updated best practices to incorporate RAMP, including StateRAMP, Risk Authorized Management Programs, into the solicitation process from beginning through contract administration. StateRAMP was just so proud to be a member of the working group. And this is a must read. If you have not seen this yet, if you work for a government in procurement or privacy, data security, you name it, this is a guide that is definitely worth your time. You can find it on our website at stateramp.org or download it directly from govtech.com. A couple of terms you're going to see incorporated in the CDG guide, and definitely when you take a look at our best practices documents, are some of the different security assessments and statuses that we have. So StateRAMP, from StateRAMP Security Snapshot through Authorized, I just want to take a minute to recognize each of these different statuses and programs. So StateRAMP Security Snapshot, that program is new for StateRAMP. We launched it in early 2023, really based on listening very carefully to many of our members in 2022 and hearing the question of how do we begin? And our StateRAMP Security Snapshot really answers that question. So our StateRAMP Security Snapshot at the beginning can be an independent one-time assessment that providers can engage our security team at the Program Management Office for. And what this assessment provides, the snapshot gives, is a security maturity score. And it's like a gap assessment that says, hey, this is where the product cyber maturity is relative to being able to demonstrate compliance with the most minimum critical controls of NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. So that snapshot is for procurement, really that apples to apples comparison, quick look at the cyber posture of a product. It's great to incorporate in this solicitation process up front to really streamline that process when you're beginning that procurement. The Progressing Snapshot Program. So again, this is for providers whose product has not yet achieved a StateRAMP Ready or Authorized status. Once they have that snapshot, providers can enroll in our Progressing Snapshot program that's going to allow them to update that score quarterly and then also be able to benefit from monthly consultative calls with our security team to really understand how to close those gaps, how to improve cybersecurity in the most efficient and expeditious manner. StateRAMP Ready and Authorized are our milestone statuses. Those really demonstrate compliance with the most minimum critical controls, or for StateRAMP authorized, the full set of security requirements. StateRAMP ready and authorized as our milestone statuses do require an independent audit and then monthly continuous monitoring and reporting from the provider into our security team. So what does all that mean in terms of what do you do with it? How do you leverage these assessments or statuses if you're a government member or looking at becoming a participating government with StateRAMP? Well, we've spent some time developing some StateRAMP best practices, and you can find these on our website as well. But I do want you to know that behind all of these resources, we have just an extraordinary team. Our government engagement team is comprised of awesome individuals who come from government and are here to assist you. They're ready to help be an extension of your team, whether it's updating draft policies, looking at solicitation template language, or just helping be a resource for education and outreach for your supplier community as well as your team members. Our team is here to help support. And you can find these resources on our website at stateramp.org, or reach out to our team at Government Engagement Team. So that's get@stateramp.org, and schedule a call or just ask for some to be pointed in the right direction, and we'd be happy to help. What you'll see in our templates and resources is that we've really built on top of the CDG guide to incorporate best practices and sample language. We have in our language what you'll see at the bidder stage for solicitations. You're going to see requirements or language that really incorporates the StateRAMP security snapshot. So again, having this upfront early in that solicitation stage is going to provide you with really clear, simple, apples to apples information about that cyber posture for the product. Then for those vendors that you do choose to work with, that you award contracts to, a recommendation would be to require StateRAMP ready or StateRAMP authorized within a period of time, 12 to 18 months. What that will do is ensure that once they reach that StateRAMP authorized or ready stage, is begin to really see confidence in the product cyber posture, but also that monthly continuous reporting and information sharing. Our progressing snapshot program is something that you can do in the interim while those providers are working towards StateRAMP ready or authorized. By enrolling in the progressing program, you can have visibility, your information security team can have visibility into how that product is progressing along the cyber maturity. And are they making progress, right, toward being able to meet the most minimum critical requirements and controls? The next few slides I'm just going to touch on, but we will make this information available to you so you have it to refer back to. But just as a quick summary, we have security snapshot. Again, for procurement, this is going to help you in gaining objective scoring and simplified contracting. So rather than having hundreds of security questions in your solicitation, by requesting this up front, you're going to have a clear picture, and so is your information security team up front in that solicitation process. Our progressing snapshot program, again, is going to be a tool for your InfoSec team and also contract compliance to make sure that this provider and that security posture is continuing to improve and progress. Progress notes. So this is a point I do want to make. The entire time, providers have the ability to grant access to their government customers to be able to view progress notes, updated snapshot scores, as well as continuous monitoring and reporting. One of the things that happens with StateRAMP ready and authorized, like I mentioned, is that monthly continuous reporting. We did in 2022, our Standards and Technical Committee adopted a continuous monitoring escalation guide that I think is just so critical for our participating governments. And what that escalation guide does is really define at what point in time do participating governments receive proactive notices so that you can log in and view, are there any significant changes or security risks that you need to be aware of? And our goal in having that communication throughout, whether it's progressing snapshot through authorized, is so that we can facilitate proactive communication, be a really good partner in that risk authorized management program, so our government partners can take action if needed. They can see if there is a risk, right? Or if there is a potential threat, they can take action on their end to be as secure as possible. I'm going to go to our StateRAMP program benefits and end here before we transition to our panel discussion. One of the things, I know you'll hear this a little bit during the panel discussion, but one of the things we're just so thrilled about as we've begun really working with some of our government members toward implementing StateRAMP and incorporating these best practices into what they do, some of the benefits of the program that we've seen is really increased communication and alignment between the offices of the Chief Information Officer, the Chief Information Security Officer, and the Chief Procurement Officer. So being able to have really great collaboration across these offices to work together, StateRAMP can kind of be a bridge to bring these groups together to be able to proactively address some of these cyber risks. We've seen for our information security teams that we're working with, many of them have really dedicated people and resources to be doing some of the same assessments that StateRAMP can take on. So if you've got team members who are dedicated to doing these assessments, our hope and what we've seen happen is that by working with StateRAMP, those individuals who are assigned to doing the assessments for vendors are able to shift to really being more oversight and management. Because StateRAMP can take on that assessing stage and do it one time for all of our different government members. Our government members then are able to shift that personnel from assessor to oversight. And that's incredibly important so that our government members are able to spend more time really doing only what you can do and managing risk. For our providers, this has the ability to open the doors and really level that playing field rather than limiting that playing field, right? Because sometimes security can be a hurdle. It can feel like a lot. StateRAMP is here as a nonprofit. Our mission is we want as many providers to succeed as possible. We want to bring innovation to government faster and really open those doors for small businesses, for all businesses. And so by having our snapshot program, it is available to any. It is available to any provider, regardless of contract status or maybe where they are in their cyber journey. We're here to help, and that snapshot program really helps everyone get started. So this opportunity to help small businesses, and one of the things you're going to see more of from us are additional resources for small businesses, in addition to the reduced fees that we have as well. Another just lesson that we continue to see bear out is recognizing cloud is everywhere. So it doesn't have to be in an IT commodity code anymore for it to be IT, right? We are seeing more often than not, services are being delivered using a software as a service, a SaaS product, a platform, cloud solution. And so by recognizing cloud is everywhere, it really makes us think about where does this apply? And so we have this opportunity working together to, I think, be more proactive, improve our education, and most importantly, improve our security outcomes. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to shift right into today's panel discussion and encourage you to reach out if you're interested in learning more. Email get@stateramp.org or info@stateramp.org, and we would be happy to help. So today, as we transition to the panel, I just want to welcome my esteemed colleagues who are joining us. Dugan Petty. Dugan Petty is a StateRAMP board member and a senior fellow for the Center for Digital Government. If you've worked in state government very long, you probably have run across Dugan Petty somewhere along the way. Dugan is a former Chief Information Officer for the state of Alaska. He's a former Chief Procurement Officer for the state of Oregon and recently retired from NASPO Value Point. We are thrilled to have him on our panel today. He was an original member of the working group for the Center for Digital Government in 2014, and again for this latest update for 2023. We also have Sean McSpaden. Sean McSpaden is a senior fellow for the Center for Digital Government and really led the working group and facilitated that for this most recent update for the Center for Digital Government working group and best practices guide. And last but not least, we have Stephen Petty, better known as Doc Petty, from the state of Colorado. No relation to Dugan, we don't believe, but Doc Petty is the Director of Security, Risk, and Compliance for the Office of Information Security for the state of Colorado. I know you're going to enjoy this discussion, and thank you for being here.
In 2014, the guide took off. It started because if you think back in 2014, we were beginning to adopt cloud. But cloud in 2014 meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and state and local governments largely hadn't come to grips with how to contract for it. So Steve Emanuel, who was the CIO at the time in the state of New Jersey, wanted to contract for the cloud. And his neighbor to the south, Jim Sills, the CIO in Delaware, had a cloud first policy. And so they got together and they asked the Center for Digital Government to see if we couldn't convene a work group and come to some understanding of what the best practices were for cloud procurement and how to buy this as a service, because at the time, everything was as a service, whether it was software as a service or communication as a service or whatever it was as a service. And all the providers were offering a cloud service, but it wasn't specific. I mean, everybody's definition of clouds were different. So the problem was that if you were going to contract for it as a state, you had to come up with some common definitions. And so we got together a cold winter morning in January in Trenton, New Jersey, and Steve had us in and kind of opened it up, and we had probably 30 different providers there and CIOs and their attorneys and procurement people from a variety of states that were participating. And we thought we would have some kind of discussion to come together on what best practices were here. Well, it was just crazy in that first day because all the providers had a different version of what they thought the cloud was for them. And New Jersey started out, or I'm sorry, Delaware started out with a great cloud first policy, but everything was cloud. And what we quickly found out is that we were talking past each other and talking different things because we really hadn't broken it down into the technology stack. Two later meetings in Dallas and then ultimately in Boston, and we were able to come to consensus on what some best practices were that included a model set of terms and conditions, not just for every cloud procurement, but we use the NIST standards for software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And once we did that and began to break down the technology stack and saw the varying levels of responsibility for the different technology stacks, then we were able to build some terms and conditions around it. So the first guide had model terms and conditions for software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. It also had a section on auditing. It had an appendix and best practice guide on procurement. What are some things that we should be doing in the procurement process that could result in more effective procurements? We look at it from an operational point of view, from a personal point of view, from a security point of view, a data point of view. And that structure that we had in 2014 essentially stood the test of time. A lot of states have used it before we even had it published. Phil Bertolini, who was then the CIO of Oakland County, Michigan, was using it for their procurement. So he was testing this out before we even had it published, and it was working. And then I mentioned earlier in the introduction that I was involved with Utah's really landmark procurement of cloud services for NASPO Value Point. And they used the terms and conditions right out of that cloud procurement pretty much as they were. And so those two tests told us that the supplier community could be on board, and we got great solutions based on those terms and conditions. So I said at the time, and I think it's still true, that we probably cut a couple of years off of the adoption curve. If everybody had been out there doing essentially the same thing, all at the time, all chaos in the market, eventually it would have sorted itself out. But I think this cloud version 1, the first 2014 guide, really helped cut the corner on adoption and created some standardization both in the market with suppliers and and gave states a document to work towards. Then in 2016, if you remember back, hybrid clouds were gaining traction and continue to give traction. So the rewrite in 2016 really provided more definition around hybrid clouds, more information, tuned up some of the terms and conditions, and put a lot into the audit section, which was really important because states needed a way of auditing. And if you think back, FedRAMP started in, I think, 2011. It was really in its infancy and still rolling out on a federal basis when we did that adoption. And while states knew kind of what it was, there was nothing yet to hang your hat on. So things progress, and the new version, the 2023 version, really addressed some changes significant changes that have taken place since 2016. Notably, kind of a coalescence around NIST 853 and the NIST cybersecurity framework as a standard for states and local governments to begin to manage their cloud adoption by. And that really opened up FedRAMP, StateRAMP, and also some states building their own risk authorization management program like Arizona and Texas. So that kind of brings us up to date on kind of what that was attempting to do and what it's done. And I think it has been tremendously successful. Steve Nichols, who was with us, was Georgia's chief technology officer, and with us on the 2014 rewrite and part of the 2016 rewrite, made the comment that was a document that they shared with anybody in Georgia when they were beginning to talk about cloud, to help them get a grounding in it. And that was kind of a first step baseline document that they used to help them. And I think it's still, this new version, up to date in the area of risk authorization and management program and procurement integration with those programs, offers the same kind of primer and baseline reference document that people can use as they move forward with risk assessment and authorization programs.
The last update of the guide was 2016. It's almost 7 years. In technology terms, that's almost a lifetime, right? In terms of the marketplace. But certainly over time, really the federal government's leadership in the development of the NIST cybersecurity framework and in the progressive revisions with the help of state and local government experts, private sector experts across the country, to get to the revision 4 and revision 5 of the special publication 853, and those organizations across the country beginning to adopt it on a more wholesale basis, really provides a fertile ground for this kind of update. Of course, over time, the FedRAMP program, I believe, was originally established in 2010 or 11, something like that. 10 years of experience at the federal government level, and cloud service providers across the country beginning to accelerate their working relationship with the FedRAMP program in relation to service provision to federal agencies. That's another area of experience from our private sector counterparts, that they're familiar with the NIST requirements. They're familiar with having to go through a risk authorization and management program, albeit at the federal level. And there are some key differences, of course, with the state and local government and education marketplace. Certainly the formation of StateRAMP. Dugan mentioned that. You mentioned it in 2020, beginning to be operational in 2021. A real sea change for state and local government folks, and opportunities to not have to initiate programs on their own, right? And so that kind of led into the rationale of this rewrite. Certainly some of the sections that we focused on, one of them being data breach notification. It's important to note that in 2014 and certainly in 2016, not every state in the nation had a data breach notification law or experience with this kind of approach. And of course, today, all 50 states and the territories the District of Columbia have these kinds of security breach notification laws and requirements. And then, certainly, the most recent area of focus for states, territories, education organizations really has to do with privacy. And, various states are beginning to pass data privacy legislation. Of course, most of it's focused on the consumer privacy, but I think that's an important area of progress in the marketplace that's worth noting. I think the other issue that we're beginning to recognize, based on some of the cyber attacks that have occurred or cyber incidents that have occurred, that supply chain risk management is critical for us to pay attention to. So again, something new that wasn't a focus in 2016. That issue of not only hardware, software, cloud service delivery, supply chain risk management, but now the Internet of Things and operational technologies that are utilized in our critical infrastructure management and operation across the country. People really need to be thinking about these kinds of things. And again, kind of the maturity of our thinking, of our practice just wasn't there in 2016, and it's beginning to be now. So, that was, all of those factors together led to the Center for Digital Government believing it was time to update this guide. And we have the great privilege of working with 3 cities, county governments, and 6 states, as well as organizations like StateRAMP, NASPO Value Point, and others to update this guide. I think the second part of your question really was around the most challenging sections to update. Of course, we didn't do a wholesale update. I mean, I would tell you, when I was originally had the opportunity to get involved in this project, I read the 2016 guide. My impression was, hey, this is actually still relevant today. Most of this really is. There are certainly some areas that needed to be updated. Dugan mentioned some of them: the data section, the security section, the audits section, the data breach notification section. And then, of course, we ended up creating 2 new appendices, one around aligning the procurement approach with risk authorization and management programs, and then creating a pretty comprehensive risk authorization and management program checklist. And that one's Appendix 9. But the most challenging section, at least from my perspective, apart from the new appendices, was the audit section. And I think really in 2016, the predominant method of audit was the SOC 2 Type 2 audit. Those are periodic assessments, essentially what a permissive ability to select controls and requirements that would be used for the audit, as opposed to a full framework, a full industry standard set of security and privacy controls that you need to use not only initially, but on a continuous basis as part of continuous monitoring. So we knew some real changes had occurred, substantive changes had occurred in that audit area. And I think you'll certainly attest from your own team's involvement. I say it was one of the most challenging because it took the longest to finalize. Certainly not only input from our working group, but also our private sector partners. 4 private sector cloud providers were very much involved in this effort, and they had an opportunity to review our draft work and provide markups. So it took quite some time to kind of get to that point of consensus, on the documents. I think also clarifying this not only complementary nature of FedRAMP and StateRAMP, but also some of the key differences that exist. And I think Doc's going to talk a little bit about that. But from his own perspective, really very important to kind of clarify the differences, clarify the focus of StateRAMP on state and local government and education organizations, and the fact that the federal government and FedRAMP, really is meant to serve federal agencies. Although, in absence of alternatives, it's a great start. And of course, the StateRAMP program, as you mentioned, finds its foundation in some of those FedRAMP principles.
there are a bunch of takeaways in this, but I guess I have four main takeaways. You know, that the document itself has got a RAMP checklist, which is that appendix is worth the read alone. And then there's an appendix on integrating the procurement process and the RAMP process together. And that resonates a lot to me, because to make this happen, you have to do that integration. So my four takeaways are probably: first, the importance of a cross-functional team approach to establishing a RAMP program. And they all have to have kind of a common understanding of cloud deployment. What do they mean by cloud? You know, what is it? Is it an infrastructure service, a platform as a service? What are we going to do, and how are we going to do that? And this team's got to work together in understanding the approaches that the state or the local government will take to integrate their policies and essentially make this a seamless undertaking within that jurisdiction. You know, the silos will kill you here, because if you think about it as, well, we're going to do this, and then we'll hand it over to procurement, and then they'll hand it over to security, and you're doing it, it's going to take forever, and it's not going to work. You got to pull that together, have a common vision, and you got to figure out how you're going to integrate your policies and have an integrated delivery system that can ensure that when you're out contracting for something, you're going to get the controls you need, and those are the right controls, and that you're ensure that you get them in your contract and you have some continuous monitoring. The other one, to me, is really important and kind of came through in a number of different ways, is making an adoption commitment. It's important for suppliers and your own internal team to understand that this is the policy and this is where we're going. But the thing you have to remember is you're not going to flip the switch and overnight have a mature RAMP program. You got to bring everybody along. So you got to bring the suppliers along, you got to bring the providers along, you have to bring your own staff along, and how it's going to work. So making a commitment to adoption, but then come together with that integrated team and figure out what's the right path forward. And I suspect we're going to hear more from Doc about this as well, because you know, the path forward may not be exactly the same for each one. And it may take a while to get there. Unfortunately, there are some StateRAMP controls, or some StateRAMP tools, really, not controls, that can help along the way. Leah, you mentioned the StateRAMP snapshot, the security snapshot. Great tool, help both the suppliers and the internal projects to understand where they're at and where they need to be, and how they begin to move and transition to have all controls in place. Doesn't happen overnight, but that helps. The other lever you have is that the security status levels that you select within StateRAMP allow a supplier or provider to progress through the different levels to reach the full level of control status that you want to have. So those things allow you to get that. The third point I'd like to make, I think, is really the importance of harmonizing the cloud policies with your governance policy in general and the cybersecurity policies. And then if you think about harmonizing those policies when you're in your procurement itself, in your contract, make sure that the controls, the requirements, and the terms and conditions are all harmonized. Because you know what? We heard this from suppliers and we heard it from states. There's a lot of duplication and redundancy between what you get with StateRAMP controls or NIST 883 controls with other policies that you have in place to maybe do sort of the same thing. So if you don't harmonize those and get rid of the redundancies and eliminate the conflicts, you have a problem with the contract, and you're not going to be happy with what the outcome is going to be. And then the final one, and maybe the most important takeaway I have in this, is that if you adopt a risk authorization and management program that leverages third-party audits and authorization, that can help the procurement process, not only from the initial award to make sure that the contractor has got the controls in place that you've said you need to have in place. So you've got that based on the 3PO audit, but also during the life of the contract, you're sure through continuous monitoring that you get with that authorization program, you know where they're at. You know that they are doing what they promised to do at the beginning of the award, And if there's something that begins to go sideways, you know that because you're going to be talking to them. So I think those 4 areas are probably the biggest takeaway in my book.
It's our hope that state and local government, procurement, legal, IT, and cyber leaders across the country are going to read every word of this 150-page guide. But that said, pride of authorship aside, we do recognize that most will likely see a section or an appendix of interest, and they're going to dive into content at that level, right? And so, because everybody's at a different point along their journey in adopting cloud solutions and in really understanding the kinds of security and privacy controls they need to put in place. And so, in part, we have constructed the guide with some planned redundancy of key content areas for just that reason, so that critical best practice advice isn't missed if a reader decides to jump around a bit, so to speak, within the guide. I think the other thing that we really hope is that people recognize that, and certainly we believe that adoption and use of the best practice guide, and best practice advice contained within the guide, it really does represent an opportunity for public sector and cloud service provider alignment. Perhaps, kind of a generational opportunity, and certainly can have generational impact, as Dugan indicated, really leapfrogging the adoption of these best practices in their own jurisdiction. It really is going to take a whole of government approach to cloud and as a service procurement. And what we mean by that is that what we heard from our vendor partners is that the worst thing in the world would be for them to have 50 states taking individual approaches, one-off approaches to risk authorization and management. The worst thing would be for hundreds, if not potentially thousands of local governments to take, again, that one-off individual approach. They're really hoping that through accelerated adoption of NIST Special Publication 853 security and privacy controls, and through the use of these common, you use the term centralized risk and authorization management programs and services, like StateRAMP, certainly at the federal government level, FedRAMP, that people can come to a common approach, that they can have common expectations. And that really is going to lead to more consistent, cost-effective, and efficient cloud service procurements, fewer situations where you have non-responsive bidding out there because someone can't meet a unique state requirement or a unique local government requirement here and there. We're all playing off the same playbook, and that really is critical for the nation as a whole in the public sector to make accelerated progress.
When you look at things like the CDG procurement guide, a key benefit that I look at it, I think, we keep talking about it as a whole of government approach to procurement. In my opinion, this directly aligns with one of our key focuses in Colorado towards what we refer to as whole of state. And essentially what it comes down to is from a technology and risk and vulnerability perspective, these things are evolving and growing at a pace across all of our environments. We have lateral movement that's occurring in one area, and it's impacting entire organizations. It's impacting entire communities, entire governments. All of these things, this is where it really becomes essential. And I like what Sean talked about. He mentioned the supply chain, third-party risk. Those are essential. All of these things need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed not only at the forefront during the procurement, but Leah, to your point, it also needs to be addressed and monitored in real time effectively. We want to have that visibility. We want to know what's happening. We want to know when something falls out of compliance. We've talked a little bit about the differences between FedRAMP and StateRAMP. That alone, that key area right there is essential to the difference that I see between these two, and that is that ability to gain that visibility into what's happening in a real time. That's what StateRAMP really brings in. And again, when I look at the procurement guide, this has been documented and processed. And again, Dugan talked about it, Sean's talked about it. It provides that baseline, if you will, that we can all kind of rally around and say, okay, we're going to establish this minimum threshold here, and this is what we have to do in order to do business and to be able to protect the integrity of our data throughout the state, throughout government in general. And essentially what it comes down to is protecting our communities, because that's our business. That's what we do. So that's what I see whenever I think about, the work and the time and the effort that has gone into creating these procurement guides. Again, it brings all of the different parts together. It's not just procurement, it's not just legal, and it's not just an IT problem. These things impact entire communities. When one of these systems becomes impacted, when something goes wrong, when these services cease or get interrupted, it impacts our citizens. And that's really what it comes down to. And that's really what I look at it from that perspective. The CDG guide, what StateRAMP provides, the documentation, the plans, these are all beneficial, but they're great resources. But truth be told, every state, every implementation is unique into itself. I was very much interested and involved in how this all adapted, and Texas became a part of this. But even before that time, I've been a fan of where StateRAMP is and what it provides. I've done a lot of work, as I say, with policies, and my previous experience working with federal policy at a national level is you're trying to get all of these different unique states, unique things to each state, and bring them all together. So that really comes into play whenever we start talking about implementing StateRAMP. It's going to be very unique. So what works in one state may not necessarily work in another state. The most important thing that I always try to tell people is just don't be afraid to get out there and get started. That's the first starting point on this. And the other thing I like to tell people is that it's very much going to be a waterfall moment, because as you get started on this process, Sean talked about there's different levels. He talked about legal, he talked about procurement. Everybody is going to focus on their areas. As you start introducing StateRAMP and as you start implementing this process, he's correct. They're going to be focused on their areas. But the driving thing is that once they start seeing the benefits to this, once they start seeing how that's going to benefit their business needs, that's when that waterfall moment is going to come into play. And that's where everyone is going to coalesce around this. And I really do believe that, much like FedRAMP, StateRAMP is something that's going to wind up impacting all of us across the nation. We're all going to be able to leverage that and benefit from that. To that point, I'd like to, bring back up again, we've talked a lot about snapshot. That itself is a great kind of lead way into that conversation, because when we're talking to your vendor communities, there's so many things where this can benefit the vendor community, and it kind of ties in with what we were just saying, where that waterfall moment, the vendor community is going to look at this and go, well, this is going to be a heavy lift for me. This is something I've got to, it's going to take time. I'm here, I'm doing a business, I'm doing a service. So whenever they start going into this process, one of the things that I like to explain to them is, number one, we're going to get a snapshot. We're going to get that base score level, and then we're going to help you to figure out what that gap analysis is from where you need to be. So it's really going to fine tune what it is that the vendors are really focusing on. And it's going to fix a age-old problem that the vendors have always complained about. And that's, I've got to do this for this agency, I've got to do this for that agency, and I've got to do this multiple times. This is do once and refer many times. So it very much is a cost-effective and resource-effective solution to be providing to our vendors. So again, that kind of goes back to when we talk about the implementation. When we start talking about how are you going to go about implementing that, different states go about it from different ways, and it has different impacts on doing business within the state. But the first part of that is the communication. You want to, everything that Sean's talked about, that Dugan's talked about, that you've talked about, it all comes down to communication. You want to be very transparent and provide that information to everyone across the board. For the vendor community, especially, again, focus on how this is going to benefit the vendor community. And where that's going to help them to expand on their business, make things easier for them. So again, within Colorado, we were very fortunate in that we have rules in support of the Colorado Information Security Act. Those rules provide the CISO as the authority with the responsibility to integrate, coordinate, and oversee information technology throughout the state. As part of that, we're able to address a lot of this as far as implementing it through that appointment, if you will, or through that authority. So other states have similar things, maybe not quite to that level, but again, the implementation and how you communicate that across all levels with your procurement teams, with your vendor communities, internally across your IT and your networks, that's going to be key to how quickly this is adopted and how quickly you can get this going. But again, the most important thing that everyone just get started in that process. It's going to have a direct impact. Again, when you look at the whole estate, we were talking about the risk and the vulnerabilities. The whole process behind the whole estate is that we're only going to be as secure, we're only going to be as strong as the weakest link in that chain. When you start talking about at a state level, everything is connected. You have large communities, you have small communities. The one driving thing that I've found is that so many of our smaller communities lack the resources. They lack the funding, they lack the staffing, they don't have access to the expertise in order to do things at a level that today's technology really has to have in order to provide that secure environment. So that's where something like StateRAMP really comes into play. Again, from the very onset, from the RFP process and onward, you're actually dictating and saying, look, we're going to look at these things. We're going to have some visibility in these things, and we're going to establish those benchmarks again. And from there, we can build on. So again, from a whole of state or from a whole of governance altogether, that all ties in together. And you can have the greatest, fortress in the world. We've kind of evolved beyond that, that mortar and brick, environment that we all are so familiar with from years ago. We've kind of evolved away from that, like you talk about with IoT. Those borders have extended. Well, even if you had the strongest borders in the world, again, your smaller communities, your smaller areas, that's where these problems can enter into and start to begin to impact other agencies, and again, across all of the state and even the federal government. So we have the proliferation of nation state actors. When we start looking at risk, risk management and risk control, and the need for this assessment process, that is just as vital for those small communities and those small townships throughout the state as it is for our biggest, cities. They are each, in their own respective way, a portal, an open portal into your network. So you've got to protect everything, and that's where whole of state comes into play.
Doc made some great points, and one that we've seen over the years is that not all jurisdictions really have the capacity to do some of this complex authorization, assessment, or even cloud procurement. So to the extent that that we can create a path that's replicable, it's really important. In general, when you think about, I think FedRAMP adopting this, it was GSA kind of looking and driving this and attempting to implement it across all federal agencies. One of the things that we have in state and local governments is the ability of each of those to be kind of incubators. And as Doc said, the paths won't all be the same. Some of the key points will be some of the issues they have to look at. We've provided some guidance on it, but it'll be a little different in how the states to do it. So we learned in talking with Texas and we're talking with Arizona and their implementation, some things about scope, what's in and what's out that we wouldn't have considered if we hadn't talked to people who had led the way before and learned from what they did. And I think that Colorado is going to, it sounds like they're going to implement this in a way that hopefully will allow other jurisdictions within the state to leverage it, which is great. And the other thing that we'll learn from Colorado is how they dealt with it. And so as those things become visible, as your process and the way you've dealt with scope issues, the way you deal with the transition issues, bringing your suppliers along, there are other states who are more than just kicking the tires moving forward, and they're going to want to learn from that. So collaborating and sharing those lessons learned in StateRAMP has been a great repository of that information, just like the Center for Digital Government's guides have been. That can be really powerful in helping everybody adopt and considering solutions that have kind of come out of this that look like they might apply in your own jurisdiction. So I think Colorado's got a really important role to play in their adoption and keeping track of what worked well and what didn't work, and sharing that with other states as they begin their RAMP adoption.
It's really gratifying to have this guide updated, to have folks beginning to use the wisdom of the crowd, so to speak. But make no mistake, certainly, as they say, cybersecurity is a team sport. This certainly was a team sport, and having again that collective wisdom from our city, county, state partners, our private sector partners, and collaborators like yourself and your team, and of course our great team of senior fellows at the Center for Digital Government. I've always believed that we really have much to learn from colleagues in our state and local government and education organizations around the country. This is my 25th year, as I mentioned, in public service, and rarely have I been confronted with a problem or issue that some other colleague in another state, in another public jurisdiction hasn't faced themselves. I mean, granted, you can have some unique situations, but generally speaking, I really believe that we need to avoid the temptation to try to reinvent the wheel, that we've got to pick our heads up, we got to seek out and learn from and apply best practice advice from our colleagues across the nation within our own jurisdiction. Doc is absolutely right. You have 50 states, and we all have some unique characteristics, but generally speaking, when we talk about cloud and as a service procurement, granted, we can have varied procurement laws, varied procurement approaches. We can have over time different evolutions of cybersecurity programs and requirements, but we really need to step back and see where the marketplace is today, and kind of adjust our thinking, have a change in set to move toward this more uniform approach. In particular, when most all of us are working with the same cloud service providers. There are a lot of them, but there aren't that many of them, right? And they're all beginning to work. If they have federal government agency clients, they're beginning to work on a regular basis through the StateRAMP program, and those that are focused on the SLED marketplace are certainly going to be looking at StateRAMP, if not working through StateRAMP. And so, as Doc indicated, the certify or become authorized once and have many references across the country. That's the approach that's sustainable, not 50 different states taking 50 different approaches. So, I really do believe that that's what this best practice guide represents. Each version of the guide, 2014, 2016, and this most recent update, includes and builds upon the battle-tested lessons learned and best practice advice from our colleagues around the nation. And certainly we hope as a team that state and local governments and education organizations put that knowledge to good use in the coming weeks and months ahead.
Fantastic. We are coming upon time. I think we could keep talking for days, at least hours. So I just want to thank everyone for the time that you've given us today. As Doc alluded to, and we've said, our government engagement team is available to help break this CDG guide down and break down the steps for how to implement StateRAMP and where to begin. And, we're available to share those resources, to serve as an extension of your team, kind of helping project manage the process if that's of interest. Really encourage you to reach out. You can call Doc too and see what he has to say about it. But you can reach out. Yes, reach out to us. You can find our information at stateramp.org, and we'll share a little bit following today's session. But Doc, you started to say something.
No, I completely agree, and great, very well said, Sean, and I completely agree. The way we go about implementation may differ from state to state, but our goal is right on the mark. So that shared that shared philosophy of information, Leah, that you're talking about, yes, most definitely. I welcome any state, anyone who has questions. Please feel free to reach out to Colorado. I'll be more than happy to share any information that we have, including our pluses and our cons. As far as anything that we found that didn't work, I'll be happy to share that with you as well. So I'm really looking forward again to seeing this progress throughout all of the states, and I think that's where it's headed.
Absolutely. Dugan, Sean, anything else for the good of the cause as we close out today's discussion?
Well, one thing, I guess if you're a leader in a state or local government organization and you're thinking about what should I be doing here, I think the one thing that we've kind of talked about throughout today and is built into this guide, the big takeaway is go all in. Adopt NIST 853 revision 5 and adopt it as StateRAMP has addressed it in their authorization program, because those are the controls that aren't unique to federal government, but are the controls that can make cybersecurity stronger and more effective in your cloud deployments. And when you think about it, those NIST standards didn't come about out of the vacuum and they just out of the ether. You had industry experts and government experts looking at cloud contracting as it relates to government. These controls you're not going to get any better than that. The next version might be better, but right now it's better than anything you can do on your own. And so adopt them and adopt them in full as they relate. Don't just customize them, don't partially adopt them, because you don't want to be one-off like Sean was talking. If we all, like a whole of nation approach, adopt these controls and move into a risk authorization management program, we're basically dealing with, we're going to have more competition from our suppliers. We're going to have increased cyber security on all of our cloud deployments. And we're going to make our procurement process a lot more efficient and effective than it would be. And then the other thing I would say is that use StateRAMP as a service. Consider it to be StateRAMP as a service rather than trying to replicate it and build your own. It's a heavy, heavy lift to stand up your own RAMP program. I think if you talk to Texas or Arizona, they would mention that to you. But you can have this service from the smallest jurisdiction to the largest one just by engaging StateRAMP. So go all in. Don't go part of the way there. That's not a shortcut. Don't take shortcuts. That's going to be longer. Go all in with NIST 853, Rev 5, and StateRAMP.
I think I have just some brief closing remarks. Dugan said it very well in regard to the adoption of commonly adopted security and privacy controls and the use of StateRAMP and RAMP processes. I would just reflect that of course we're all confronted in the public sector in particular with trends that are sweeping society and the technology marketplace, and we ignore them at our peril. We really have a broader responsibility, and we need to pay attention to what's happening, what the new and innovative approaches are, what the common approaches are across the country. Certainly, where this guide is concerned, we updated key sections of the guide, really understanding that we needed a foundational lift. We needed a foundational refresh. That said, the marketplace continues to change. We really do believe that in the future there could be an opportunity for further exploration and as you indicated, appendices or other standalone guides around X as a service. Obviously, we're moving beyond kind of those core infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service monikers into things like security operations center as a service, data as a service, identity as a service. And so some of those particular cloud service offerings have some unique characteristics that, again, best practice advice and lessons learned, I think, will be very important. In addition, I think certainly we've talked about supply chain risk management, ripe for exploration. And then, of course, from our supplier community, issues, I don't know if we'll ever get there, but issues like limitation of liability and other state unique or jurisdiction unique requirements that our cloud service providers would like to see normalized in the future, I think are certainly there for consideration. But suffice it to say, I think we've all, which was not the case in 14, may not have been the case in 2016, but governments across the country are on an accelerated basis, partly because of the pandemic, adopting cloud-based services. They're commercially proven. They support a level of innovation and value that public agencies desperately need, that we really can't do on our own. And it's time for governments to embrace that kind of change and benefit from it, but only if we can do so in a secure manner. And so we really need to think about, again, these issues of the best approach to adopting a risk authorization management program and how to normalize or become consistent with the rest of the nation on security and privacy control adoption.